We have the curious case of his gravestone spelling his middle name with 2 A's when his birth certificate has it listed with 1 A.
For the longest time, a safe tied to Elvis Presley stayed hidden from the public eye. It had followed him through fame and fortune, yet no one knew about it. When the safe was finally discovered after 46 years, something important was gone. But who could have removed it? Join us as we find out what this missing item is. Elvis's personal hidden space. Back in Graceland, the famous mansion in Memphis, Tennessee, was where Elvis Presley lived for most of his adult life. Now, it was the year 2023, and a team of people was carefully going through the parts of the property that had not been touched in a very long time. Graceland had been a museum for decades, open to millions of visitors every year, but there were still corners of the estate that stayed closed off and forgotten. These were the private spaces that held the leftovers of a life that ended suddenly and too soon. It was in one of these areas that something extraordinary was about to be found. The storage area in question was a dim, dusty space filled with old boxes, covered furniture, and items that had been stacked and locked over many years. The people working there that day were not expecting to find anything of great importance. Their job was to document, sort, and preserve whatever was left behind. This kind of work requires patience. Most of the time, the items found are ordinary: old clothes, paperwork, household objects. But every so often, something turns up that stops everyone in the room completely still. That is exactly what happened when they moved a heavy shelf unit away from the wall and saw the edge of a metal object behind it. It was a safe, not a large one, but solid and clearly built to last. The kind of safe that someone would choose specifically because they wanted to protect what was inside from the rest of the world. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, and parts of it had developed rust along the edges and corners. But the body of the safe was still intact, and the door was still firmly shut. No one in the room had known it was there. It had not appeared on any inventory list, nor was there any record of it in any of the documentation that the estate had kept over the years. It had simply been sitting there, hidden behind that shelf, for approximately 5 decades. The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. There was a kind of stillness that came with the realization they are standing next to something that has not been seen or touched since before most of them were born. Elvis had passed away in August of 1977. That meant this safe had been sitting in that spot since at least that year, possibly longer. Everything inside it, whatever it turned out to be, had been sealed away since the days when Elvis himself was still alive. The people in that room were the first human beings to be in its presence since an era that most of the world only knows through photographs and recordings. Getting the safe open was not a simple task. The combination was unknown, and there was no documentation anywhere on the property that gave any clue about the numbers needed to open it. A professional had to be brought in, someone experienced in working with old safes. This kind of work takes time. The metal had aged, and the internal mechanisms had stiffened over the decades. The process of opening it without damaging the contents inside required a level of care that matched the significance of the moment. The tension in that room was the kind that does not need words to be felt. When the door finally opened, the smell that came out was the smell of time itself. Old paper, faded fabric, and the particular scent of air that has been trapped and sealed for nearly half a century. It was a smell that made everything feel more real. This was not a prop from a movie or a display in a museum case. This was an actual object that had belonged to an actual man who had lived and breathed and made decisions about what was important enough to lock away and protect. The contents inside were arranged in a way that suggested intentionality. Things had been placed there with care, not thrown in randomly. The safe was small enough that it did not hold a large number of items. But what it did hold was clearly personal. These were not business documents or commercial records. They are the kinds of things a person keeps close because they carry special meaning. There were items that connected directly to Elvis's daily life, to the people he loved, and to the moments that mattered most to him, away from the stage and the cameras. Each item had to be carefully removed and documented by the team. The process was treated with the same seriousness as an archaeological discovery, because in a sense, that is exactly what it was. The discovery sent a strong wave of excitement through the people responsible for preserving Elvis's legacy. After 46 years, a piece of his private world had come back to the surface. Graceland had always been a place that held history, but this was different. This was not a room that had been curated for visitors. This was something raw and unplanned, a genuine piece of the past that had been waiting in the dark for the right moment to be found. And as significant as the discovery itself was, what came next would turn out to be even more remarkable. The safe's content. The room was completely quiet as each item was brought out of the safe one by one. The team worked slowly, treating every single object with the kind of care that a doctor uses when handling something fragile and irreplaceable. Every item that came out of that safe was placed onto a clean surface, examined closely, and recorded before anyone allowed themselves to react. This was the discipline required in moments like this, but beneath the professionalism, the emotional weight of what was happening was impossible to ignore. These were the private possessions of one of the most famous human beings who had ever lived, untouched since the year he passed away. The first items to be removed were documents. They were old, yellowed at the edges, and delicate in the way that paper becomes after decades of being sealed away from fresh air. Some of them had faded significantly, and the ink on certain pages had blurred in places where moisture had found its way in over the years. But enough was legible to make clear that these were personal papers, the kind that a person keeps because they represent moments in a life that felt important enough to preserve. Letters were among them, written by hand in the style of an earlier era, folded and kept in the same position they had been placed in all those years ago. There was also jewelry, not the elaborate rhinestone-studded pieces that Elvis wore on stage under the bright lights of Las Vegas. Those were the public Elvis, the performer. What was found in the safe was more intimate. These were small pieces, the kind worn close to the body and not for display. A ring with a stone that had dulled slightly with age, a thin chain, delicate and simple, a pair of cufflinks that had no flash or extravagance to them at all. These items told a story about a side of Elvis that most people never got to see. A man who, away from all the fame and performance, had tastes that were surprisingly understated. Among the contents were also private photographs, the kind that people take of the people they love in ordinary moments. Some showed family members in casual settings. Others showed friends gathered in relaxed moments. A few of the photographs showed locations, places that appeared to be meaningful to Elvis in ways that were not immediately obvious to the people examining them. Unlike the iconic images of Elvis that the world already knew, these photographs showed a man living a private life, one that existed entirely outside the mythology that had grown around his name. There were also small personal objects that did not fit into any single category. A pocket watch, its glass face scratched from years of use. A folded piece of paper with handwriting on it that was not a letter but appeared to be a list, written for oneself alone, with no intentions of another set of eyes reading it. A small religious medallion, worn smooth in the way that objects become when they are used frequently and with feeling. Each of these things, taken on its own, might seem irrelevant, but together, inside that sealed safe, they formed a portrait of a person, human and completely real in a way that no biography or documentary had ever quite managed to capture. What struck the people in that room most deeply was not the monetary value of what they were finding. None of the items appeared to be extraordinarily valuable in a financial sense, with the possible exception of the jewelry. What was striking was the intimacy of it all. A safe is a place where a person puts the things they cannot bear to lose. It is a place chosen specifically because it offers protection. The fact that Elvis had chosen these particular items to place behind a locked metal door said something profound about what mattered to him most. They were not trophies or souvenirs of his fame. They were the anchors of himself. As the documentation process continued and each item was logged and photographed, the team began to construct a picture of what the safe had originally contained. And it was during this process that something became apparent. The collection of items, as meaningful and surprising as it was, felt incomplete. Not in a vague or general way, but specifically. The way a shelf feels incomplete when a single book has been removed, and there is a gap where it used to stand. The arrangement of what was inside the safe suggested that something had once occupied a space that was now empty. The other items seemed almost organized around an absence, a hole at the center of everything else. That realization changed the energy in the room entirely. What had begun as a moment of extraordinary discovery now carried a new and unsettling atmosphere. The safe had given up almost everything it held, but one thing was gone. Whatever had once occupied that central space had been removed. Not by time, not by decay, not by accident. Been taken, and no one in that room or anywhere connected to Graceland had any immediate explanation for where it had gone or who had last touched it. Ulf, the missing item, what it was and why it mattered. To understand why the missing item carried so much weight, it is necessary to understand something about Elvis Presley that casual fans often overlook. Elvis was a deeply sentimental man. Beneath the leather jackets and the gold records and the sold-out concert halls, there was a person who attached huge emotional meaning to physical objects. He held on to gifts, mementos, and keepsakes long after most people would have set them aside. The people who were closest to him throughout his life knew this about him. He was not someone who discarded the past easily. He carried it with him, and the safe that had just been discovered was one of the places he kept it. The missing item was a notebook. Not a diary in the traditional sense, but something closer to a private journal of thoughts. A collection of handwritten notes, reflections, and ideas that Elvis had kept over a significant period of his life. It was a physical book, bound and filled with pages of his own handwriting, and it had been known to exist by a very small number of people who had been part of his inner circle during the final years of his life. It was never something that had been discussed publicly. Its existence was known only through private conversations between people who had no reason to make the information widely known. What made this notebook significant was not simply that it was written by Elvis. It was what the notebook was reported to contain. According to the accounts of those who had some knowledge of it, the pages held Elvis's own words about his life in a way that he had never allowed to be shared publicly. He was a man who gave thousands of interviews and spent decades in the public eye, yet he remained very secretive about certain aspects of his inner world. The notebook held the version of Elvis that existed when the cameras were off and the performance was over. The man who sat alone with his thoughts and wrote them down. The notebook was said to contain reflections on his childhood in Tupelo, Mississippi, during a time of genuine poverty and hardship. Elvis spoke about his early years in interviews occasionally, but always in a controlled way, always with a kind of distance. What he wrote in private was understood to be far more open. The rawness of those early years, the financial struggle, the isolation, the complicated dynamics of a family trying to survive, was something he processed, and those pages were where that processing took place. This alone would have made the notebook one of the most important documents connected to his life. Beyond his childhood, the notebook was also reported to contain his thoughts about fame itself. Elvis became famous faster and more completely than almost any other person in the 20th century. By the time he was in his early 20s, his face was recognized everywhere. That kind of sudden, total exposure changes a person in ways that are almost impossible to explain to someone who has not experienced it. The people who knew Elvis well understood that he had complicated and sometimes painful feelings about what his fame had cost him. Those feelings would have offered a window into his experience that no other document could provide. There were also pages about the people he loved most deeply. Elvis had relationships with family, with close friends, with romantic partners that he protected fiercely from public attention. He was loyal to the people in his inner circle in a way that defined him as much as his music did. What he wrote about those relationships, the gratitude, the grief, the complexity of loving people while living a life as overwhelming as his, would have been extraordinary to read. These were not the stories told in authorized biographies or fan publications. These were the true and emotional records of a man trying to make sense of an impossible life. The absence of this notebook from the safe created a specific kind of loss. Physical objects can be replaced or at least forged. Jewelry can be appraised. Documents can sometimes be reconstructed from other sources. But a handwritten personal journal is irreplaceable in the most absolute sense. The words in that notebook existed nowhere else. There was no copy, no transcript, no digital record. Whatever Elvis wrote on those pages lived only on that paper, in that binding, in his own handwriting. If the notebook was gone, those words were gone with it, unless it existed somewhere, in someone's possession, waiting to be found or returned. The people responsible for managing Elvis's estate understood immediately what the absence of the notebook meant. It was not simply a missing item, it was a void in history. A silence where there should have been a voice. Fans who learned about the discovery of the safe and then about the missing notebook felt the loss in a way that was surprisingly personal. Elvis had been gone for nearly 5 decades, but the idea that his most private words might still exist somewhere or might have been destroyed carried an emotional charge that cut across generations of people who had grown up with his music as a constant in their lives. The theories and investigation. When the absence of the notebook became known to the people managing Elvis's estate and the broader team working on the Graceland preservation project, the first instinct was not to panic, but to investigate methodically. Missing items from historical estates are not uncommon. Objects get misplaced, mislabeled, moved to different storage locations, or accidentally separated from their original context during the chaos that follows a sudden death. It was possible that the notebook had simply been moved somewhere else during those difficult early days and had been sitting in a different location ever since, unidentified and uncatalogued. A thorough search of Graceland's storage areas was conducted, a systematic process that covered every storage space on the property. Teams worked through rooms that had not been properly examined in years, going through containers and shelving units and sealed boxes with careful attention. Every item found was cross-referenced against existing inventory records. The search was extensive and took a long period of time. At the end of it, the notebook had not been found anywhere on the property. Its absence from the safe was not the result of it having been moved to a different part of Graceland. It was genuinely gone. This led investigators and estate representatives to turn their attention to the period immediately after Elvis's passing. The weeks and months after August 1977 were a time of extraordinary disorder at Graceland. A large number of people passed through the property. Family members, close friends, business associates, legal representatives, and others that were connected to the estate in various capacities. Security during that period was complicated by grief. In those circumstances, it would not have been difficult for someone to have removed an item from the safe before it was sealed behind the shelf unit where it was eventually found. The question was who and why. One theory that gained traction early in the investigation was that the notebook had been deliberately removed by someone who wanted to protect its contents. Elvis had been a private man, and the people closest to him shared that instinct for privacy on his behalf. If someone from his inner circle had known about the notebook and had read even a portion of what it contained, they might have decided that the world was not meant to see those words, at least not immediately, and perhaps not ever. Removing it from the safe and keeping it in personal custody would have been an act of loyalty in that person's mind, rather than theft. A second theory centered not on protection, but on value. Even at that time, it was understood that anything connected to Elvis Presley had significant commercial worth. A personal journal written entirely in his hand would have been, and would still be, extremely valuable to private collectors. The market for Elvis memorabilia had been active since long before his demise, and it rose dramatically in the years following it. Someone with access to the safe in those early chaotic weeks, someone who understood what the notebook represented, might have made a bold decision to remove it and either sell it privately or hold it as an asset. A third theory was darker and more troubling than the others. It suggested that the notebook had not been preserved at all but destroyed. There was a real possibility that someone close to Elvis, reading his most private and unguarded thoughts, had decided that certain things in those pages were better kept from the world permanently. Not out of malice necessarily, but out of a protective instinct that led to an irreversible decision. A fire, a shredder, a deliberate act of erasure carried out in secret. Any of these could have ended the notebook's existence. This theory was impossible to disprove, and it was the one that caused the most distress. The investigation also looked at accounts from people who had been part of Elvis's life in his final years. Some of these individuals were still alive and could be contacted. People who had been part of Elvis's inner world were accustomed to protecting what they knew, and decades of practice at keeping private things private did not dissolve simply because the stakes had changed. Some acknowledged awareness of the notebook's existence. None claimed knowledge of where it had gone. Whether this reflected genuine ignorance or a continued commitment to keeping certain things sealed away was hard to determine from the outside. By the time the formal investigation had run its course, no definitive answer had been reached. What remained was a collection of theories, a set of unanswered questions, and the strange, unresolved feeling of a mystery that had been sitting in the dark for 46 years and had now come into the light, without, as yet, any resolution. What the discovery of Elvis's personal safe has ultimately given the world is not closure, but depth. It opens a door and then reveals another door behind it, locked, with no key currently in sight. And in that way, it represents the man himself, generous with so much and still, even now, keeping just a little something back. Do you think the journal still exists or has already been destroyed?